On a beach somewhere in North Carolina. He has never named the exact location, and we respect that. There is a rock, not a remarkable rock by any measure that geologists or tourists would recognize. It does not have an unusual shape or a notable composition or a history that anyone else would bother to record. It is a rock of the kind that beaches generate in large quantities, salt-worn, irregular, sitting where the tide decides to put it. A stranger walking past it on any given morning would give it no particular attention. Richard P. cannot walk past it. He has never been able to walk past it. The first time he saw that rock, he was not on a beach. He was dead, or as close to dead as the human body can manage and still return. He was 21 years old in the backyard of his cousin's house in eastern North Carolina, and something had gone wrong with the whiskey at the oyster roast, and then something had gone wrong with the dirt bike, and then something had gone wrong with his heart. 2 minutes without a heartbeat. His cousin Pat watching a face with nothing behind it. In those 2 minutes, Richard went somewhere. And in that somewhere, before he was sent back, someone showed him a rock on a beach he had never been to and would not visit for years. They showed it to him the way you show someone a landmark, the way a parent points and says, "You will come here. When you do, you will know why." Years later, he found the rock. It was exactly as he had been shown it. Same shape, same position, same quality of light coming off the water behind it. He stood there for a very long time. He calls it his sacred ground. But that is not the detail that brought you here tonight. The detail that brought you here tonight is a sentence spoken to him in that somewhere between heartbeats by a woman he had never met and would never see again. Spoken not to comfort him, not to reassure him, not to tell him that everything was fine. Spoken as a statement of fact, a clarification, an answer to a question he had raised in the panicked logic of a 21-year-old who had grown up in a church and was terrified that he had done something wrong. He had cited the commandment against killing. He was trying to make an argument. She was not interested in the argument. She turned to her left, to the council assembled there, and said uncalmly, with the measured authority of someone who has explained obvious things to frighten people many times before, "Well, there are a lot of people in heaven who have killed people." This is the story of Richard P. It is the story of what happened to him on October 18, 1979, in a backyard in North Carolina, and of what he has done with it in the 45 years since. It is the story of a celestial tribunal presided over by a woman who reminded him of Judge Judy, and of a light behind a mountain that she said was something to behold, and of a set of numbers that streamed toward him from the edge of the universe. Numbers he did not understand for 46 years until the morning of December 20th, 2025, when he recognized what they were. He is 67 years old now. He volunteers at a local food pantry. He is a husband, a father, and an amateur astronomer who studies maps of the night sky with a patience that has no clear origin in anything his life contained before October of 1979. He does not fear death, has not feared it in 4 decades, and the absence of that fear has not made him reckless. It has made him useful. It has made him, by his own account, more careful with the things that are actually alive. He waited 45 years to write this down. He waited, he says, because the experience was too large for the words he had, and the main instruction he received was too heavy to set down casually. We are going to tell you what the instruction was. But first, you need to understand what can be proved. Before we tell you what Richard saw in those 2 minutes, let us tell you what has since been confirmed. There is, first, the matter of his skin. For years before October 1979, Richard had a dermatological condition that his doctor described as an allergic reaction. Red patches spreading across his body, blisters that itched, a persistent low-grade irritation that never fully resolved, and that affected his concentration and his sense of himself. He had seen a dermatologist. He had received diagnoses. Nothing had eliminated it. On the other side of those 2 minutes, in the somewhere he visited between heartbeats, the woman in charge told him, in passing, almost as an afterthought as she was sending him back, when he stopped smoking and drinking, the condition would eventually clear up. She was not gentle about it. She was describing a fact. the way a mechanic describes what happens when you fix the actual problem. He stopped. The condition cleared. Completely and relatively quickly. There is, second, the rock. He had never been to the beach in question. He had no particular reason to go. What he had been given in those 2 minutes was a visual image so specific and so precise that when he arrived at the location years later, the act of recognition was not gradual. It was immediate. He knew the rock the moment he saw it. He knew the angle of the light on the water behind it. He knew the exact relationship between the rock and the shoreline in that particular position on that particular beach at that particular time of day. He had been shown it in advance with a precision that a dream cannot achieve, because a dream borrows and recombines what you already know. He had never known this. There is, third, the question of December 20th, 2025. In those 2 minutes in 1979, Richard saw large numbers streaming toward him out of the infinite dark, a continuous flow of figures, precise and ordered, arriving as if from a great distance. He saw, adjacent to those numbers, something that looked like the four-color logo of a computer company, colored squares, arranged in a specific geometric relation, the particular design grammar of a visual identity. This was October of 1979. The operating system whose logo he was recognizing would not be released to the public until 1985, and would not achieve the specific visual identity he was seeing for years after that. Richard had no framework for what he was looking at. He filed it in the category of mystery and left it there. On December 20th, 2025, 46 years later, he recognized what the numbers had been. The Fibonacci sequence: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. The pattern that appears in the spiral of a nautilus shell and the branching of a tree, and the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, and the proportions of what human beings instinctively find beautiful in a face. The golden ratio, 1.618. The design grammar of the natural world, encoded in a sequence of numbers that arrived at him in a vision in 1979, 46 years before he understood what he was seeing. There is, fourth, his cousin Pat, who was there when it happened, who watched a body that had stopped breathing, and who said, to a room of people who had gathered with no good options, "He's okay," in the moment that he wasn't, 2 minutes before he was. We do not have Pat's testimony in writing. What we have is Richard's account of what Pat told him, which is consistent in its particulars each time Richard has described it. The body had not been breathing, there had been no heartbeat, and 2 minutes had passed before that changed. These are the facts available to outside examination. What happened in those 2 minutes is Richard's alone. Richard P. was 21 years old on October 18, 1979. He had turned 21 exactly 19 days earlier, on September 29th, barely past the threshold of official adulthood, still carrying the habits and assumptions of the boy he had just finished being. He had grown up in the Disciples of Christ tradition, a Protestant denomination that emphasizes scripture and personal faith without heavy doctrinal machinery. He was not, by his own account, a devout young man in the formal sense. He was a young man who had absorbed enough of the framework to have opinions about it, enough to be afraid of it at the wrong moment, enough to invoke it under pressure. He knew the commandments. He had ideas about sin and consequence. He had, by the night of October 18th, already developed the sort of casual relationship with whiskey and marijuana that 21-year-olds in eastern North Carolina in 1979 developed without particular alarm. His cousin Pat's house was where he had grown up riding dirt bikes. The terrain was familiar, the particular topography of a backyard he had navigated hundreds of times, the specific distance between this tree and that fence, the way the ground changed texture in the section closest to the road. He had ridden that yard in the dark. He knew it. The party on October 18th was an oyster roast, the kind of gathering that is particular to coastal Carolina in the fall. A fire, a flat piece of corrugated metal over it, a bucket of oysters, people with gloves and knives, the specific social texture of being outside in October air that is still warm enough to permit it. Richard had brought a fifth of whiskey. He had no reason to think anything was wrong with it. Something was wrong with it. He began to feel, early in the evening, a quality of wrongness that he had never experienced from alcohol before. Not drunk, not dizzy in the usual way, but something more fundamental. A loosening of the connection between himself and the ground he was standing on, a sensation of being about to leave the space he was occupying. He told a friend he was not feeling well. His cousin later noted that the whiskey had an unusual taste and threw the rest of it away. Whether the whiskey had been adulterated or contaminated, or whether something else was already happening in Richard's body that night, this is not something that can now be established. What happened next has no witness except Pat, and Pat saw only the aftermath. Richard has no memory of getting on the dirt bike. He has no memory of the fall, or of the ground, or of the 2 minutes that followed. His memory ends at the party, somewhere in the early evening, with the wrong feeling getting worse. It resumes, instantly, without transition, inside a tunnel. The tunnel was not what he had expected. He had not, to that point in his life, given much explicit thought to what death might feel like in transit. But the cultural vocabulary of the late 1970s had begun to accumulate accounts of tunnels, of light, of peace. NDEs were entering the mainstream. Raymond Moody's Life After Life had been published 3 years earlier, and its imagery had settled into the culture at the frequency of things that get mentioned at dinner tables and in waiting rooms. Tunnels, light, a warm welcome. That is not what Richard found. What he found was terror. The most complete and absolute terror of his life. Terror that he describes, 45 years later, with a precision that suggests it has not faded with time. He knew with a clarity that required no interpretation exactly what was happening. He was dying. He was in transit. And the knowing was not comforting. It was the specific horror of a 21-year-old who had arrived at a threshold he had not prepared for, holding sins he had not yet apologized for, moving at a speed that allowed no revision. He prayed, not the composed, deliberate prayer of a Sunday morning, but the prayer of someone who has reached the end of the road and understands that the only door still open requires a key he is not certain he has. He said, "God help me, I don't want to die." He said it in the way you say things in a dream, not with his mouth, but with everything that was still him, directed toward the light he could see at the end of the tunnel, which was growing and which he was moving toward, whether he consented or not. The light arrived with a total and immediate change in the nature of what he was experiencing. The tunnel ended. The terror did not entirely dissolve. It had been replaced, not by peace, but by something more complex. He was somewhere else. He was outside. It was beautiful. That is the word he uses, without embellishment, and it is the right word. He was somewhere that could be described as a landscape, a lake, still and reflective, surrounded by mountains, with a light source behind the mountains that was not the sun. The mountains had the quality of things that have always been there, that have no history of being anything other than what they are. The lake had the quality of water that has no weather, not frozen, not agitated, simply present, holding the reflection of the light above it in the specific way that still water holds light, which is to say completely and without distortion. He felt standing there, a love that he could not then and cannot now locate in any earth comparison. He felt simultaneously that he was home, not his cousin's house, not the house he had grown up in, not any house. Home in the sense that some things feel native when you encounter them for the first time, recognized without having been previously known. Others were present. He recognized a girl from his high school, a classmate who had died of cancer while they were still students, young enough that her death had been the kind that does not yet have a category in your understanding of the world. She was there. She was not sick. There was also a figure he describes as a grandfather type, who might have been Jesus. He was not certain, and his uncertainty is one of the most interesting details in his account, because he was not a man given to uncertainty about the appearance of Jesus. He had grown up with those images, this figure he could not place. Then something drew him upward. He does not have a word for the mechanism. Something took hold of him gently and moved him up and away from the lake and the mountains toward a gathering that was waiting for him in a different register of that place, where a woman was already turning toward him with the expression of someone who has been expecting this particular arrival and has questions. Her name was not Laura. He never learned her name. He called her Laura because of what she reminded him of. A judge, specifically the television judge who dispenses with pleasantries and cuts directly to the case. She was older, female, and she was very clearly in charge. To her left sat a council, other figures, a body of them, present and attentive and somehow constituting an authority that was procedural as well as moral. This was not a reception area. This was a proceeding. She began to examine him. The word Richard uses is frantic. She examined him frantically, the way a trauma physician examines a patient who has just arrived, quickly, systematically, front and back, with the focused urgency of someone cataloging damage in real time. He found this alarming. He was already afraid. The examination made him more afraid, not because it was aggressive, but because it was efficient. She had done this before, many times, and she was already forming a conclusion. He started talking. This is the most human detail in the entire account. A 21-year-old boy, terrified, standing before a celestial tribunal, starts making his case. He tells her he is a Christian. He confesses that he has been drinking. Confesses it the way you confess to a parent whose trust you have broken, with the particular awkwardness of someone who is aware that the confession is both necessary and inadequate. He tells her he smokes marijuana. He tells her, in the slightly garbled logic of a young man working from the material he has, that he knows God has no patience with drunkards. He was trying to get ahead of it. He was trying to explain. Laura told him, precisely and without particular sympathy, that he was not drunk. And then she told him that smoking would not keep him from going to heaven. He raised the commandment against killing. He cited it the way someone cites a law they are hoping applies, not because the charge was on the table, but because he was casting a wide net, trying to find the thing that might be held against him, trying to argue against an accusation that had not yet been made. He invoked the law he knew. Laura turned to the counsel on her left. "Well," she said with the particular calm of someone who has answered this exact question many times, "there are a lot of people in heaven who have killed people." She said it the way someone states an obvious thing to someone who has been making it complicated. Not cruel, not dismissive, simply factual, as if the proposition were so well established in the place she came from that raising it as a barrier had never quite made sense to her. Richard did not argue. He had no argument. Laura determined, through whatever calculus governed her examination, that he was not as seriously harmed as the situation had initially suggested. She made her decision. She turned to the council and issued a directive with the brevity of someone who does not need more words than the words she uses. Turn him away from the light. The thing Richard noticed, that he has noticed ever since, and that he considers significant enough to italicize in his written account, is that she did not say turn him away from God. She said the light. He has spent 45 years with that distinction. He still does not have a complete theory of what it means, except that it was deliberate. The word chosen was the word intended, and the word intended was not the word he would have expected. He was going back. He understood this. He had a request. He asked about the skin condition. He described it to her, the patches, the blisters, the persistent quality of a problem that never resolved. And Laura, with the brisk efficiency of someone working against a deadline only she could feel, told him when he stopped smoking and drinking, it would eventually clear up. She was already moving on. Richard asked, earnestly, practically, with the genuine concern of someone trying to carry something back from a journey, whether he would be able to remember all of this when he returned. Laura stopped. The register of her delivery changed. What had been clinical became emphatic. What had been efficient became absolute. She looked at him with what he describes as maximum seriousness, the look of someone who has one message to deliver and wants to be certain the delivery holds. What you must remember is do not commit adultery. She said it as if she had been saving it, as if everything else in the examination had been procedural, and this was the substance. Richard, 21 years old, suddenly aware that he did not know the precise definition of the word in the context she was using it, asked her, with the honesty of someone who has just been told something important they do not fully understand, "Wait, what is adultery?" Adultery is breaking God's love. After the mountain, she sent him out into the dark. A door closed behind him, his words, the image he returns to, and the light was gone. And he was somewhere between that place and this one. And in that anteroom, he saw things. He saw the rock on the beach, not as a symbol, not as a metaphor, as an image, precise and exact, the specific rock, on the specific beach, with the specific quality of light that would be there when he arrived years later and found it. He saw large numbers streaming toward him out of the darkness, a continuous flow, precise and ordered, arriving from a great distance as if they had been traveling toward this moment for a very long time. He saw, associated with those numbers, something that looked like the 4-panel logo of a computer company. Colored squares, arranged in a specific geometric relation, the design grammar of a visual identity. October 1979. The operating system whose logo he was seeing would not exist for another 6 years. Richard had no framework for what he was looking at. He put it in the file where things go when you do not have a place for them, and he closed the drawer. 46 years passed. On December 20th, 2025, the drawer opened itself. The numbers were the Fibonacci sequence: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, the pattern that describes the spiral of a nautilus and the branching of a tree and the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. The golden ratio, 1.618. The design grammar of everything the natural world builds when it builds something that lasts. It had been shown to him in 1979, in an anteroom between life and death, in a vision he could not decode for 4.5 decades. He saw the peace. He describes it as a separate thing from the love, not the same sensation, not interchangeable. The love was vast and overwhelming and personal. It saw him and held him in the way the sun holds a leaf. The peace was something else. It was structural. The substrate beneath the love, an eternal organizing stillness that did not fluctuate because it was the foundation on which fluctuating things were built. He says he could see it, and that it moved slowly, like a wave of mist across dark water. He says he could have reached out and touched it, and that what he would have touched would have been real. He saw a map of the stars, a complex, precise, coordinate-bearing chart of the night sky, azimuths, grids, the notational language of serious amateur astronomy. He had not, at 21, the vocabulary to understand it. Over the following decades, he would acquire that vocabulary, the way someone acquires the grammar of a language they have, it turns out, heard before. He uses Stellarium software now. He studies azimuths. At 67, he believes what he saw was not a physical sky map, but a map of universal consciousness, the same system, rendered in the language of stars. Then a voice said, "Go back." The return was not gradual. He describes it as a whoosh, the specific kinetics of something moving at a velocity that the human concept of velocity does not contain. As if he had been at the edge of the universe and the distance back to a backyard in North Carolina had been crossed in a single instant, without the middle part. He came back into his body the way a current enters a wire, not gently, not incrementally, but with a pulse of energy he describes as an enormous wave of charged plasma. He has believed for 45 years that the energy of a spirit entering a living body is what generates the heat that keeps that body at 37 degrees Celsius. He offers this not as proof of anything, but as the most coherent explanation he has found for what re-entry felt like from the inside. Pat and the others were carrying his body to a car. He was in the body when they were doing this. The first thing he said, not "Where am I?" Not "What happened?" Not "I'm okay." The first question that surfaced from the specific intelligence that had just returned from a tribunal and a mountain and an anteroom full of visions was, "How long was I there?" When they asked where, he told them. He told them he had been away from here. Pat, who had watched the body without a heartbeat for approximately 2 minutes, said, "Yes, we know. You were not breathing and had no heartbeat." He told Richard it had been about 2 minutes. Richard said, "It felt like a couple of years, or maybe a couple of 100 years, or more." He felt, in the moments after returning, the specific weight of having come from something infinite to something very finite. The weight of a body with limits, the weight of a life that hurt, the weight of a world that was, in his own words, full of pain and suffering and death and dying, a rotten, sloppy world. He thought seriously about letting go of consciousness again, not from despair, but from the pull of what he had been standing in front of. Laura had told him the pull would be there. She had told him his life was not finished. He held on to that, and to the body, and to the difference between what he wanted and what he had been told. He stayed. Pat said, "He's okay." Richard was not okay. He was 21 years old and had just stood before a judge who had sent him back with instructions too large to explain to anyone at a party in North Carolina. He did not tell anyone. Not then, not for a very long time. The experience was too large, and the instruction was too heavy, and the world he had come back to was not equipped with a container for what he was trying to carry. He is not unusual in this. The research on near-death experiences, accumulated over the last 50 years in peer-reviewed journals, in the work of Raymond Moody and Kenneth Ring, and the cardiologist Pim Van Lommel, in the 2023 AWARE-2 trial conducted by Sam Parnia at NYU Langone, suggests consistently that the delay between the experience and the disclosure is often measured in years or decades. The experience itself is too large for the available vocabulary of the moment it occurs. People come back changed, and the change requires time before it can be articulated. What the years gave Richard was verification, one confirmation at a time, arriving without announcement, requiring no special interpretation, because the information had already been delivered in advance. The skin condition cleared when he quit drinking and smoking, exactly as specified. The rock on the beach was exactly as shown. The star maps he studied matched the maps he had seen. And on December 20th, 2025, 46 years after watching numbers stream toward him out of a celestial anteroom, he recognized what he had been looking at. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. The ratio between any two adjacent numbers in that sequence, as it extends toward infinity, converges on 1.618. The golden ratio, the design grammar of the Nautilus, the sunflower, the spiral galaxy, the proportions of the human face that other human faces find beautiful without being able to say why. It was shown to him in 1979 in a vision he could not yet decode, by a process whose mechanism he cannot explain and is not trying to. Richard is 67 now. He has a son with special needs, an adult son, for whom the years since 1979 have required a quality of patience and compassion that Richard believes the experience gave him, or at least prepared him for. He volunteers at a food pantry. He has not feared death in 45 years, and the absence of that fear has not made him careless. It has made him, by his own account, more attentive to the value of what is actually here. He meditates. He is grateful. He reads. He studies the night sky with the specific focus of someone who has already seen a map of where it leads. His wife, when he finally told her, wondered whether the whole thing had been DMT, the endogenous compound that some researchers propose as a mechanism for near-death experiences. Richard's answer is patient and consistent. That night in 1979 was the most sober event of his life. The whiskey was wrong before the accident. What happened in those 2 minutes was not pharmaceutical. It was, he says, the most real thing he has ever experienced. And for 45 years, in small, quiet, verifiable ways, the evidence has agreed with him. There is a word Laura used that Richard has never been able to leave alone. Not God, not love, not even heaven. Though she spoke of heaven without hesitation, as a place with demographics and policies, and a judge who examined newcomers with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The word she used when she turned to the council and issued the directive that would send him back was the light. Turn him away from the light. Not away from God, not away from heaven, away from the light, as if the light were a specific thing, a destination with coordinates, and God were something else, something larger, something that contained the light the way a room contains a lamp. He has thought about this for 45 years. He does not have a resolution. He suspects the importance is the kind that takes a lifetime to understand. He is still thinking about adultery. Still unpacking the definition Laura gave him. Not the legal and social definition, not the interpersonal meaning, but the structural one. Adultery is breaking God's love. The breaking is specific. It happens when you place something between yourself and the source of all of it. Not because the source becomes angry, because the connection becomes interrupted. The way a wire interrupted can no longer carry current. The love is still there. The channel is closed, and the closing is the cost. Not a punishment, but a consequence. The way a plant in the dark does not receive sunlight, not because the sun has withdrawn, but because something has come between them. He told you this tonight. He waited 45 years, and then he told you. This is NDE Cosmic Legacy. Every week we bring you one account, one person, one story, one set of details that were verified or cannot be explained or have been carrying someone for 45 years waiting for the right moment to be set down. We do not tell you what to believe. We tell you what was reported, and we tell it as carefully as we can, and we leave the conclusion where it belongs, which is with you on whatever night you are having, in whatever room you are sitting in. If this episode found its way to you tonight, leave a like, not for us, but for the next person who needs this story and does not yet know it exists. The like is how the algorithm finds them. It is a small act with a long reach. Subscribe to NDE Cosmic Legacy and turn on the notification bell if you would like to be here when the next account arrives. We release one story per week, every week. One voice, one threshold, one set of details that someone carried for years before they could set it down. Next week we return with another voice, another night, another threshold crossed. Leave a comment below. One line. Leave the question that Laura's definition gave you, if she gave you one. Leave the thing you are still unpacking, if you are unpacking something. Leave a name, if there is a name you are thinking of tonight. The comments are the place where this becomes a conversation rather than a broadcast, and that matters more than the algorithm does. If this story belongs to someone you know, someone who has stood at a threshold or who is afraid of standing at one, or who lost someone and needs to hear that the tribunal is run by someone who sounds like Judge Judy and has been doing this a very long time, share it with them. Pass it to one person, that is all. One person, one episode, one night. This is how the lantern keeps moving. It's something to behold, isn't it? That is what Laura said, standing in front of a light behind a mountain, to a 21-year-old boy who wanted to stay and was not permitted to. It is what we say to you now about the account he brought back. The skin that cleared, the rock on the beach, the numbers streaming out of the dark in 1979 that turned out to be the design grammar of the universe, arriving 46 years early. Light your lantern, pass it to whoever you know is sitting beside a bed tonight.
Not by the other,
We will see you next week.
but by something